Joining us now, New York Law School professor and former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Roiphe, the Washington Post national reporter and MSNBC contributor Carol Leonnig, and David French is back with us. Carol, this is not normal. Explain what is happening and why.
Katie, you're exactly right. It's not normal. It's actually dystopian and bizarre for the Department of Justice and the FBI folks to be on pins and needles about getting a letter from Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, telling them that under the Article 2 powers of the president, they're gone. This has put a lot of people on fear and on edge since the afternoon of Donald Trump's inauguration, when these removals, transfers, and firings began. And let's not forget, this all started that day with a series of prosecutors and lead officials in the Department of Justice learning that they were going to be transferred out of their jobs to be in charge of a non-existent office called Sanctuary Cities Enforcement, an office that didn't exist, didn't have a phone number, didn't have any employees. And those people had a lot of experience in protecting our nation, protecting us from foreign interference, and they were gone. And there's been a slew of folks afterwards. The result and the consequence of this, Katie, is that people are on pins and needles in their offices. Sources that I've spoken to, on all sorts of secret methods, are petrified of actually bringing forward cases that might at some point irritate or offend the president or anyone in his inner circle. And that is what might actually lead to paralysis in this very important law enforcement agency.
What does that mean, not to want to anger Donald Trump? What sort of cases might they not be pursuing? Is it potentially corrupt conduct within the administration, or is it potentially corrupt or fraudulent conduct among Donald Trump's donors or friends? What sort of stuff might they now feel nervous to pursue?
Runs the gamut, Katie, and a great question. Everything from, for example, what if you were looking at an insider trading case involving someone who had knowledge of Donald Trump's announcements about tariffs, which he then pulled back? Are you going to investigate a huge hijacking of our trading rules in this country if you're in the FBI or the Department of Justice? Maybe not. What about the gutting, the basic gutting of the public integrity section, which many prosecutors who were basically, either transferred out of that department or summarily removed after the dismissal of the New York Mayor Eric Adams case? What about any of those ongoing cases that they have been investigating of public corruption? Do you really think Donald Trump wants to see a case come to the Attorney General about a public official that he might like who is on the take? Probably not.
It doesn't sound like that's the country that we're used to living in, Rebecca.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, one of the core principles of prosecution is that prosecutors don't pick the people that they want to prosecute, but rather the cases that they want to bring to justice. And so it's not about choosing who you like and who you don't like. And one of the concerns here, as we were just expressing, is that instead of picking generally cases that are important, crimes that are important to prosecute, instead we're going to have a core, kind of peace corps of forces that are going after certain people and not going after certain people because of their relationship with the president. And that is, very troubling, because it's something that is a hallmark of an authoritarian state, not a liberal democracy like the one.
Let me just read a couple things that have been happening just recently. The DOJ did not give a reason for why they fired Maureen Comey, James Comey's daughter, just summarily dismissed. That's what we know as of now. Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are both under criminal investigation for potential wrongdoing in the Trump-Russia probe. This happened today. AG Bondi released files to Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley related to the FBI's handling of the investigation into ... Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server and mishandling of classified information during her time as Secretary of State. This has been done before. This has been gone through. The FBI went through it in 2016.
Right. I mean, you know, and it's exactly why we have these civil service protections whereby normally a president doesn't go in and fire these career prosecutors. They're protected by civil service protections that were put in place particularly to combat a kind of cronyism that would lead to these situations in which you would have somebody in political power who is using the power of prosecution, the vast power of prosecution, to go after their enemies and save their friends. And so, you know, what's particularly concerning is that kind of cronyism in the hands of prosecutors have so much power to ruin somebody's life, you know, easily before a court could even be involved.
It's not just perceived political enemies, David. It's also certain cases that they don't agree with or they don't seem to agree with, doesn't align with their agenda. And one of the things that comes to mind, also news out today, is the Breonna Taylor case, the woman who was shot and killed during a botched police raid a few years back. DOJ under Joe Biden prosecuted the officers involved in this. They killed an innocent woman. Under Donald Trump, one of the guys who was set to be sentenced could have gotten a life sentence. Well, the prosecutors under Trump are recommending 1 day in prison.
Yeah, 1 day in prison. Now, this officer fired 10 shots into Breonna Taylor's apartment, did not hit Breonna Taylor. So I think the idea that he would have gotten a life sentence was completely wrong. It would have been substantially less than that. But here's what's interesting, Katie. Previously, what we've seen in the DOJ distortions is we've seen Trump going after personal enemies and rewarding personal loyalists. So the January 6th rioters who were granted pardons or clemency, those are personal loyalists. When he fires like James Comey's daughter, that's in a daughter of a hated enemy. So you can always tie these things, or previously you've generally been able to tie them to something personal to Trump. But where the perversion gets even worse is when the bias becomes not just personal, but categorical. So categorically, we have seen a terrible mistreatment of immigrant detainees. We've seen them subjected to conditions, sometimes in overseas prisons, that would violate the 8th Amendment if applied in the United States of America. And then here we have an example of a police officer who was fired and prosecuted. And when he was fired, the head of the Louisville Police Department said that his actions shocked the conscience, should shock our conscience. Prosecuted successfully. And now what? He gets a slap on the wrist. The Trump Department of Justice is seeking a slap on the wrist. So this is where you start to get really concerned. Is there categorical favoritism for favored populations and categorical hostility against disfavored populations? And that is what the Civil Rights Division is supposed to stand fundamentally against. Yeah. And now it's an instrument of bias rather than combating bias.
David, it's so good to have you on this. Same with you, Carol, and you, Rebecca. Appreciate it.